Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird is a retired long-range, high-altitude, Mach 3 Plus strategic reconnaissance aircraft developed and manufactured by the American aerospace company Lockheed Corporation. The SR-71 had several nicknames, including Blackbird and Habu. The SR-71 was developed as a black project from the Lockheed A-12 reconnaissance aircraft during the 1960s, and it was developed and manufactured by Lockheed Skunk Works division. American aerospace engineer Clarence Johnson was responsible for many of the aircraft's innovative concepts. The shape of the SR-71 was based on that of Lockheed A-12, which was one of the first aircraft designed with the reduced radar cross-section in mind. Initially, a bomber variant of the A-12 was requested by Curtis LeMay before the program was focused solely on reconnaissance. The SR-71 was longer and heavier than the A-12, allowing it to hold more fuel, as well as a two-seat cockpit. The SR-71's existence was revealed to the public in July 1964, and it entered service with the United States Air Force in January 1966. In 1989, the United States Air Force retired the SR-71 largely for political reasons. Several were briefly reactivated during the 1990s before their second retirement in 1998. NASA was the final operator of the Blackbird, using it as a research platform. It was retired again in 1999. During missions, the SR-71 operated at high speeds of Mach 3.2 and high altitudes of 85,000 feet, allowing it to outrace or entirely avoid threats. If a surface-to-air missile launch was detected, the standard evasive action was to simply accelerate and outpace the missile.
In order to achieve those kinds of speeds, a ramjet is typically needed. A ramjet, as you can probably guess from the name, relies on ram pressure to operate. Ram pressure is simply the pressure that occurs as a plane rams itself through the air. So, as the engine moves through the sky, it funnels this high-pressure air inside. Before entering the combustion chamber, the supersonic airflow must be first slowed down. This basically acts like the compressor stage of a normal jet engine, elevating the air pressure before it enters the combustion chamber. Once the air enters the combustion chamber, it is mixed with fuel and ignited. It expands and accelerates once again out of the exit nozzle. With no moving parts, this type of engine is capable of flying at speeds far greater than a typical turbine-driven engine, but it cannot start from zero. It needs forward movement in order to achieve the correct compression of air in the combustion chamber. So, they are either dropped from a conventional plane, have a secondary propulsion system, or are a hybrid of a conventional jet engine and a ramjet, which is precisely what the SR-71 used. The turbojet J-58 engine of the SR-71 is nestled inside the nacelle here. In front and around the J-58 is a complicated system of airflow management. These control mechanisms allow the propulsion system to transition from a primarily turbojet engine to a ramjet engine in mid-flight. First, the inlet spike. It is capable of moving forward and back by 0.66 meters. This adjusts the inlet and throat area, which controls the airflow entering the engine. It also keeps the position of the normal shockwave at its ideal position between the inlet throat and the compressor. This is the most efficient position for the shockwave, as it minimizes the energy lost due to drag as air flows over the shockwave. The inlet spike stays in the forward position until Mach 1.6. After this point, it begins to move backwards by 41 millimeters for every 0.1 increase in Mach number, keeping the shockwave in its ideal position. The inlet spike contains perforations which connect to the outside of the nacelle through ducts. Initially, the airflow will come from the outside in to provide additional airflow to the turbojet engines, but once the plane hits about Mach 0.5, this airflow reverses. As the plane speeds up, the inlet spike develops a significant boundary layer of air. A boundary layer is a layer of very slow-moving air that clings to the surface of objects. By bleeding this layer of slow-moving air off the inlet spike, it frees up a greater area of the inlet area for high-energy, fast-moving air, and thus improves efficiency. Around the engine, there is a bypass area, which takes air from the inlet and bypasses it around the J-58 engine. This air was used to cool the J-58, which again improved engine efficiency and allowed the plane to fly faster. After the air passes the engine, it rejoins the airflow just after the engine afterburner, adding additional thrust as more oxygen becomes available for combustion and increases the pressure through the ejector nozzle. Air got into this bypass area in a number of ways. There was a shock trap, otherwise known as the cowl bleed, located here, which again helped minimize boundary layer growth. There were suck-in doors, located here, which only opened from Mach 0 to Mach 0.5, to add additional air to the bypass for engine cooling. Air from the aft bypass doors, located just before the J-58 engine, also fed into the bypass. These, together with the forward bypass doors, which vented to the atmosphere, were used to control the pressure level in the inlet at the optimum level. If it was getting too high, a pressure sensor would trigger the forward bypass doors to open, allowing more air to exit the inlet, while the aft bypass doors were controlled by the pilot. These doors played a critical role in maintaining the position of the normal shock wave. If this was mismanaged, the engine would lose control of the normal shock wave and may even spit it out of the intake, resulting in a sudden power loss called an unstart, which would cause the plane to violently yaw in the direction of the faulty engine. If this happened, the forward bypass doors would open fully and the spike would move to the forward position to reduce back pressure and get the shockwave back into its normal position. Besides this bypass area that took air from the inlet and dumped it into the ejector, there were also 6 bypass ducts that took air from the compressor and dumped it directly into the afterburner. These ducts were the primary mechanism that transformed the engine from a turbojet into a ramjet. Afterburners are great. They significantly add to thrust without needing a whole lot of additional weight. They basically just inject fuel into the exhaust of the jet engine and ignite it with whatever oxygen is left to provide additional expansion and therefore thrust, but they are really inefficient. However, as the speed increases, they are the only feasible way to generate thrust, and they do gain efficiency thanks to the forward motion providing the compression of air needed to run them, instead of the turbine needing to be powered to turn the compressor stage. The crazy thing about the SR-71 is that the engineers could have eked out more thrust from this engine to increase the top speed even more. Ramjets can go up to Mach 5, so why did they stop at 3.2? Would they have run out of fuel? Fuel efficiency in terms of cost doesn't mean a whole lot to a military plane like this. The military doesn't care about cost, but the more fuel you carry, the heavier and bigger the plane gets, increasing the fuel it uses. There is a break-even point and the plane's range will be limited. But the engineers did manage to fill the plane up with an astounding amount of fuel with some clever engineering. The plane was strictly a surveillance plane, so no internal volume was used for weapons, freeing up space for fuel. You have probably heard that the SR-71 leaks fuel on the runway because there were gaps in the fuselage, but that's a simple fact that ignores much of the engineering that caused it. The SR-71 used something called a total wet wing fuel tank system, which meant that the fuel was not contained within a separate fuel bladder. This was a weight-saving measure. Separate metal fuel tanks would add too much weight, and lighter plastic ones would melt from the intense heat generated from the aerodynamic friction. So, the fuel was contained by the skin of the plane itself. The engineers applied sealant to every gap the fuel could possibly come out of, but because the titanium skin of the plane expanded and contracted with every flight, it gradually deteriorated over time, allowing the fuel to leak out. Because of this, the SR-71 had to regularly go into maintenance and have sealant reapplied, but it usually came back still leaking, just not quite as much. The number of man-hours required to reduce it to zero was simply too great to fit it between flights, so they just had an allowable fuel leak limit, which looked like this.
On average, each SR-71 would fly one mission per week due to the extended turnaround required after mission recovery. A total of 32 aircrafts were built, 12 were lost in accidents, with none of them lost during enemy action. Since its retirement, the SR-71's role has been taken up by a combination of reconnaissance satellites, unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, a proposed UAV successor, the SR-72, is under development by Lockheed Martin and scheduled to fly in 2025. As of 2024, the SR-71 holds the world record, which it set in 1976, as the fastest air-breathing manned aircraft. This was previously held by a closely related Lockheed YF-12.
With aerial refueling, the plane could stay in the air more or less indefinitely, provided there was no mechanical issues. Really, the range was entirely determined by the pilots. The longest operational sortie occurred in 1987, when the US flew the SR-71 from Okinawa to observe developments in the Iran-Iraq War. This mission lasted 11.2 hours and likely required at least 5 aerial refuelings along the way.
In this clip, we see the Blackbird chased and surrounded by Russian Su-27s, which intercepted it over its airspace. The SR-71 continued on its mission, gathering intelligence over Russian airspace, trailed by the 4 Su-27s. When it was done with its mission, it raised the nose, hit the afterburners, and it disappeared into the sky. The Russian fighters turned around and returned to their bases. That was a classic evasive maneuver for the SR-71. Climb and speed away out of harm's way. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and hit that notification icon for the latest videos as they are released. Thanks for watching and catch you in the next one. Ciao for now.